Pay rent or get out." He shouted, the antiseptic sting still clinging to my skin. I whispered. I said no. The slap came fast. Blood filled my mouth as I hit the floor, but as I lay there on the hospital tile, I knew this time I wouldn't stay down. Part 1. It started 3 months ago in the middle of a gray March when the skies hung low and every breath felt like borrowed time. I had just lost half my hours at the clinic. Not because I did anything wrong, but because the budget committee said the numbers didn't justify keeping full-time nurses in a low-income district. Translation cut costs, cut care, and cut people like me. I was 28, a single mother, exhausted, behind on rent again. And my daughter, Danny, only 6 years old, had just been prescribed a new inhaler after 2 ER visits in 1 month. I stood in line at the pharmacy that day with $42 in my checking account and listened as the clerk told me kindly but firmly that the copay was $73. That night, I sat on the floor of our tiny one-bedroom apartment back against the fridge while Danny colored beside me. Her little hands moved the crayon in circles, oblivious to the storm gathering above her head. I looked around at the peeling paint, the leaky faucet, the letter taped to the door saying, "Payment overdue," and I broke. Pride doesn't keep children warm. I made the call. My father picked up after the 3rd ring. "Back already," he said. No hello, no softness, just that knowing tone like he'd always expected I'd fail. It would only be temporary, I promised. He agreed, but I should have known better. From the moment we stepped through the door of his 2-story house on East Oak Street, I felt the weight shift. The creak of the floorboard under my foot sounded like a warning. The air smelled like stale coffee and disapproval. He showed us the spare room, a cramped space with a water-stained ceiling, peeling wallpaper, and a bed frame that groaned when I sat down. "You can make yourselves at home," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Just don't forget this isn't a charity." I smiled back, but something in me twisted, because nothing with my father ever came free. Not love, not shelter, not even silence. At first it was small things, groceries, gas, replacing the Wi-Fi router because the old one didn't reach the spare room. He'd make little comments. "You're the one using it most after all." I paid without complaint, even when it meant putting off my own dental checkup again. Then Eric came into the picture. My younger brother, 26, still living at home. Still unemployed. Still the golden boy. I'd come home from double shifts to find him sprawled across the couch, gaming headset glued to his ears, while Dad cheerfully told me that Eric was just going through things. Apparently depression meant he couldn't apply for jobs but had no trouble ordering Uber Eats with my card. They never asked. They just expected. Dad would say in that same grave tone from my childhood family, helps family. What he really meant was, "You owe us. We owe you nothing." Danny noticed fast. Children always do. She stopped humming on the way home from school, started holding Bunny, her beloved stuffed rabbit, closer. One night, while brushing our teeth, she whispered, "Is Grandpa mad at me too?" I couldn't answer. That night, I sobbed into my pillow, biting it so she wouldn't hear. Then came the crypto disaster. Eric signed up for a mentorship. $900. He couldn't pay, of course. Dad cornered me in the kitchen one morning, holding the bill like it was my moral duty. "Don't act like you can't afford it," he barked. "You're working double shifts." I kept my voice low. "I'm saving for Danny's new inhalers." His face hardened. "What's more important, her lungs or your brother's future?" It was in that moment, with the refrigerator humming behind me and the light flickering above, that I realized how deep the rot ran, how long I'd been clinging to scraps. But I still stayed. I stayed because I was scared, because there was nowhere else to go, and because somewhere deep down I still hoped they might change. I was wrong. They said I was lucky. 6 stitches below my ribs, a sprained wrist. Nothing broken, just bruised on the outside. But the part no scan could show was what shattered inside. I lay there on the stiff hospital mattress gown, askew, the antiseptic still stinging where they'd wiped blood away. My mouth tasted metallic. Every inhale sent a spike of pain shooting through my ribs, but that was nothing compared to the moment he walked in. Dad didn't knock. He didn't bring flowers or ask how Danny was doing. No softness, just his voice hard and sharp, cutting through the beeping monitors. Pay rent or get out. I blinked, disoriented. What I said, pay rent or get out. His voice rose louder, angrier, and when I didn't answer fast enough, when I just stared at him in disbelief, he raised his hand. The slap echoed. My head jerked sideways. Pain exploded across my cheek. I slid off the bed, crumpling against the tile floor. The IV pulled taut, the monitor flatlined briefly until a nurse ran in minutes later. But by then, he was gone. Just gone. I didn't tell the nurse what happened, just winced and lied, said I slipped. What was I supposed to say, that my father assaulted me while I was hooked up to a machine? They discharged me the next morning. The nurse gave me a bottle of generic painkillers and a sheet of paper that said, rest at least 5 to 7 days. But how do you rest in a house that feels like a war zone? When I walked back through the front door, the kitchen smelled like burnt toast. Dad sat at the table, flipping through mail like nothing had happened. He didn't look up. You transfer the utilities yet? He asked, sipping his coffee. My jaw still ached. The gauze wrapped around my ribs itched beneath my shirt. He didn't mention the hospital, didn't acknowledge the bruise, just pointed to the thermostat and said, your room uses the most heat, and that kid of yours leaves the lights on all the time. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. That night, I sat on the edge of Danny's bed. Her breathing was soft, steady, her bunny tucked under her chin. I stared at the faint scar on her cheek, the one from a playground fall weeks ago. Back then, I'd panicked, treated that scrape like a crisis. Now, here I was stitched and swollen, and no one in that house even blinked. The next morning, a letter was slid under my door. Not a note. A printed letter. Effective immediately, rent will increase by $200 a month due to additional strain on household resources. Payment expected by Friday. House Management G. Monroe. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't, I'd scream. I texted him. Me. Is this some kind of joke, Dad? You live under my roof. You pay what I say. That's how adulthood works. 2 days later, Eric knocked on my door without looking me in the eye. Hey, Dad said you'd help cover my car insurance this month. I stared at him. Your car hasn't moved in a month. He shrugged. Still gotta keep it running. It was like I wasn't even a person anymore. Just a wallet, just a tool. Even Danny noticed. Mommy, she whispered one night while brushing her teeth, why does Grandpa only talk nice when you give him money? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. But something shifted inside me. Something snapped. The next day, Megan showed up at the house, my best friend from nursing school. She brought groceries and a soft blue blanket. She'd been calling me for weeks I hadn't picked up. But as soon as I saw her face, I broke. Tears spilled. My voice cracked. The words poured out like a dam finally giving way. I told her everything, the slap, the letter, Eric, the way Dad treated Danny like a burden. She listened, didn't interrupt once. Then she said something that stopped my breath. Jessa. You know your mom left you something, right? I blinked. What, she gave it to me before she passed. Told me to hold on to it until you really needed it. Megan reached into her purse, pulled out a small brass key. There was a tiny M engraved near the base. She told me to give this to you when things got too much. I stared at it, my fingers trembling. The metal was cool against my palm. My voice shook. What is this? She didn't say. Just that it was important. And that it was yours. That night, I sat up in bed with Danny asleep beside me. I held the key in my hand like it might whisper the next step. I hadn't thought of that house in years. The little craftsman on Ash and Hamilton, the one my mom lived in after the divorce. She passed 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Quick. Quiet. Unfair. I hadn't gone back after the funeral. Now I had a key to something she never even told me existed. And suddenly, I wasn't scared. Not of him, not of Eric, because I wasn't alone. I had Danny. I had Megan. And maybe I still had something of my mother's love waiting to be claimed. I left early the next morning. The sky was still soft with dawn haze, and Danny was already humming in the back seat, oblivious to the shift happening around her. I dropped her at school, kissed her forehead, and said, "We'll have a surprise later." She giggled. "Is it chocolate?" I smiled, but I didn't answer. Then I drove. The house on Ash and Hamilton hadn't changed much. Same lopsided porch, same lavender bushes lining the walk. The wind chimes still hung by the door, singing the exact tune they did when I was 10, sitting on that porch waiting for Mom to come home from her evening shift. The key fit easily like it had been waiting. Inside it smelled like old books and lemon oil. The air was thick with memories, some good, most aching. Her rocking chair sat in the corner unmoved. A half-finished quilt was draped across its arm thread, still looped in the needle, like she meant to come back. A calendar hung on the fridge from 3 years ago. August, the month she died. I walked slowly, almost afraid to disturb anything. My fingers trailed across surfaces like I was asking permission. Nothing looked secret. Not until I reached her bedroom. Her closet held the same stack of boxes and storage bins I remembered from childhood, but behind them, tucked against the wall, was the old filing cabinet. Black, dusty, always locked, always off limits. I knelt in front of it, the key trembling between my fingers. Click. The drawer slid open with a groan. Folders, neatly stacked, labeled in her handwriting. Property East Oak Trust account. Letters to J Medical final instructions. My hand hovered over them until I pulled the folder labeled Trust Account. Inside were 3 things. A notarized letter naming me the sole beneficiary of her father's estate. A deed to the house we were living in, Dad's house. A handwritten note folded carefully, soft from age. I opened it. If you're reading this, it means you've endured more than I ever wanted for you. I couldn't protect you from him, but I could leave something behind. They will take until you are empty. This house is yours now. Use it. Protect Danny, and never let guilt be the leash that binds you. Love always, Mom. I collapsed onto the floor. The house wasn't his, it was mine. All this time he'd ruled it like a tyrant, as if he owned it, as if I owed him for the roof over my head. But my mother had left it in my name, quietly, intentionally, because she knew he'd do exactly this. I stayed in that room for over an hour, just sitting, breathing, letting the truth seep into every cracked place in my chest. I didn't go back to the house that night. I called Megan. She picked up on the first ring. "Bring Danny," she said simply. Her guest room smelled like cinnamon and safety. Danny squealed when she saw her godmother and immediately ran to find the fuzzy slippers she always wore there. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking in a panic. In the morning, I made coffee and sat at Megan's table while she folded laundry. "I'm filing the paperwork," I said. She looked up. "You sure?" I nodded. "No more surviving. I'm taking it back." I returned to the house that afternoon with Danny in tow. Dad was in the kitchen scribbling something onto a napkin, his version of budgeting, where somehow I always owed more than I had. Eric was in the living room, still gaming bowl of cereal balanced on his stomach. Neither looked up. "Where were you?" Dad asked without turning. "With Danny," I said, "at Megan's. You don't just walk out of someone else's house like that," he muttered. I smiled quietly. If only he knew. That week, I started gathering everything, every utility bill in my name, every rent payment, every Venmo transfer to Eric. I saved screenshots, emails, printed bank records. I bought an external hard drive and labeled it Documentation, Monroe House. Every night after Danny fell asleep, I worked on that folder like it was my full-time job. Megan helped me submit a title search through the county clerk's office. We got official confirmation 2 days later I was the sole title holder. No mortgage, no co-signer, just me. My mother had sealed it that way intentionally through a trust left by my grandfather tied to her death. Dad had no legal right to the house, not a sliver. The irony made me laugh until I cried. He'd been charging me rent on my own property, calling me a burden, demanding more, slapping me across the face in a hospital bed, and all along, he was the trespasser. Still, I said nothing, because now I wasn't surviving, I was preparing. Then came the final crack. It was a Tuesday night. I came home after a short shift. My ribs still ached, but the bruises had begun to fade. Danny was in her room curled up with Bunny staring at the ceiling. She looked up as I entered. Grandpa said if I keep leaving lights on, we might not have a place to stay. The words hit me harder than any slap. I sat beside her, brushing her curls back gently. "This is our home, baby," I whispered, "and no one, not even Grandpa, can take that away." She didn't nod. She just leaned into me, quiet and small. That night, I opened my laptop. I recorded a video. I looked straight into the camera. No makeup, no filters, just my face still healing, and I spoke. I talked about the slap, the emotional abuse, the rent demands, the quiet manipulation. I inserted clips I'd saved Eric bragging on his live stream about how Sis covers everything. Dad pacing the kitchen, shouting at me over bills. I named the file For Danny, just in case. I didn't know if I'd need it, but for the first time in my life, I was ready. I didn't strike with rage. I moved with silence, and that silence was power. The morning after I recorded the video, I sat on the porch before sunrise. The air was damp. A breeze carried the scent of damp pine and exhaust from the street. Danny was still asleep inside, curled beneath her blanket, her small fingers clutching Bunny like a shield. I held the manila folder in my lap, deed trust papers, title report, notarized copy of my mother's letter. Every line of ink a lifeline, every paragraph a rope pulling me out of the pit I'd lived in for far too long. At 10:42 a.m., I sat in a lawyer's office. Same man who'd helped with my mother's estate. Mr. O'Connell, a quiet man with steady hands and tired eyes. I placed the documents on the desk in front of him. "I want a file for eviction," I said. He looked at the papers, then at me. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "And I want a protective order. I was physically assaulted in a hospital bed." He didn't ask for more details, just looked down and began organizing the documents like pieces on a chessboard. "You have every legal right," he said. That night, back at the house, Dad was in the garage, cursing at something under the hood of Eric's old car. Eric was on the porch, vaping and scrolling his phone. No one noticed as I walked past them into the house with a thumb drive in my bag and peace blooming in my chest. I was no longer hoping they'd change. I was documenting their downfall. The folder on my laptop grew thicker by the hour. Screenshots of text messages, recordings of conversations, proof of every transaction I'd made on behalf of the household. I even found a video from 3 weeks ago, Eric bragging during a Twitch stream. "Nah, I don't pay rent. Sis handles it. She's got that nurse hustle. Let her pay. It's what family does, right?" He laughed. So did the chat. That clip, it went straight into the drive. The next day, I sat down with Megan at her kitchen table, surrounded by bills and legal printouts. We combed through everything, made sure the court filings were airtight. She printed out copies of the surveillance footage from the hospital hallway, the slap, the fall. My body crumpled at the base of the bed, and somehow miraculously Danny's scream captured faintly in the distance. That moment nearly broke me again. She was there. She had seen it. But in that pain, something else was born fire. I made another video. This one wasn't just for court, it was for safety. A visual record of everything I'd endured, organized and time-stamped with source links and testimonies. I labeled it Timeline Monroe Household Abuse. I stored 3 backups, one on the cloud, one on Megan's hard drive, one on a thumb drive I kept on my keychain. No matter what he tried next, gaslighting, guilt-tripping manipulation, I was ready. And yet the quiet days that followed felt almost hollow, like the storm had gone underground. Dad barely spoke to me. He grunted, slammed cabinets, left receipts on the table with passive-aggressive notes. You drink most of the milk, gas bills higher. You were the one out late. Eric was worse. His silence wasn't passive, it was smug. He'd whistle when I walked in, flick the TV volume higher. One afternoon I caught him standing in the hallway near my room. Looking for my headphones, he mumbled. They were in his hand. I didn't react, just took them back and shut my door. They didn't know the clock had already started ticking. The eviction was scheduled for the following Friday, 10 days from when I filed, 30 days by law. But I wasn't counting down with dread. I was counting down with calm. Every time Danny hugged me tighter, I held on longer. Every time Megan dropped off groceries, I thanked her like it was oxygen. Because this time I was building something stronger than walls or locks. I was building a future. One evening, Danny tugged at my shirt as I folded laundry. "Mom," she whispered, "I drew something for you." She held up a crayon drawing. 2 figures holding hands in front of a house. One was tall with messy hair me. The other was smaller, holding a bunny. Above them was a sun with long yellow rays. Beneath it, she'd written, "Our home. Safe now." My throat tightened. I knelt and pulled her into my arms. That night, I made my final checklist. Verified deed ownership, confirmed eviction timeline with the county-documented digital evidence, copied video logs to secure CloudSet auto payment for rental deposit just in case. Because while I owned the house, I didn't want to keep it. Too many ghosts. Too many bruises beneath the wallpaper. But I would claim what was mine first. I would make them look me in the eye and understand what they'd lost. And only then would I let it go. The game started exactly 3 days after I filed the eviction. They didn't know yet, at least not officially, but they felt it. People like my father don't sense change through logic. They sense it through loss of control. It began with a question casual and sharp. "You seem busy lately," Dad said as I passed through the kitchen. He didn't look up from his coffee, but his fingers drummed harder than usual on the ceramic mug. "I've been organizing," I replied evenly. Eric peeked around the fridge door. "You working less or something?" I didn't answer. That night I found the thermostat set to 80, every single light in the house on, the washer running empty, and in the living room, Eric asleep on the couch, with the front door wide open. They wanted chaos. I gave them calm. The next morning, a folded sheet of paper was taped to my bedroom door. It read, "Utilities this month were excessive. If you can't cover your share, maybe consider downsizing. You're not the only one with expenses. House management." I took a photo of it and added it to the folder. When I got home from my shift that night, Dad was waiting in the living room. Eric leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You need to stop whatever you're doing," Dad said without preamble. "You think we don't see it, Megan coming around more? That lawyer calling last week, acting like this is your house." My face stayed neutral. "It is," I said softly. He laughed. "You think a few scribbles on paper make you some kind of queen." He stood looming. "This is my house. I've paid every bill in it since the day your mother left. I've poured my life into it. You've done nothing but use and betray." Eric added, "Yeah. Real nice example for your kid, tossing out her own family." My hand didn't even shake. Family doesn't hit their daughter in a hospital bed. The room fell silent. Dad's face twitched. "Don't twist things. That was discipline. You were being disrespectful. You split my lip while I was hooked to a monitor. I kept a roof over your head," he shouted. "And charged me rent," I said, "on a house I own." The silence snapped like a twig. He didn't deny it. Instead, he changed tactics. "Don't you care what people will say that you threw out your sick father sick?" It didn't take long to see where he was headed. 2 days later, I returned home to find Val, our elderly neighbor from across the street, waiting on the sidewalk. She looked uncomfortable, wringing her hands. "I heard you're evicting your father," she said without greeting. I blinked. "He told me he's been diagnosed with COPD, said he asked for help driving to his appointments, and you refused." I stood there stunned. That evening, I found Dad dramatically wheezing in the living room, an untouched bottle of expired cough medicine next to him. Eric had apparently told his gamer friends online that I was kicking out our dying father to move in with some doctor boyfriend. They were building a smear campaign, a whisper network of guilt and misinformation. I said nothing, because I didn't need to say anything. Leah from 3 doors down showed up at our porch the following night. In her hand was a phone. "There's something you need to see." The screen played a grainy, shaking video. I recognized the scene instantly. The hospital room, my body in scrubs, Dad's voice barking, the slap, the fall, the sound of metal against tile, Danny's scream in the background. "I work part-time in that wing," Leah said. "Security was supposed to delete it after 30 days, but I kept a backup. I didn't know if you'd ever want it." I couldn't speak. She placed the phone in my palm. "You're not crazy," she said gently. "He can't lie his way out of this." Inside, Danny was at the kitchen table, quietly coloring. I knelt beside her, holding the phone behind my back. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "do you remember the hospital?" She nodded slow. "Did you hear anything that day?" She looked up at me. Her eyes were still so young, but not untouched. "I heard him yell. I saw you fall." I hugged her tight. Not to comfort her, but to anchor myself. The countdown was getting louder, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The next morning, I found the eviction notice torn from the bulletin board in my room. I expected that. I printed another copy and placed it on the fridge with a bright pink magnet. Eric threw a fit. "This is sick. You're just trying to embarrass us. You think you're going to kick us out and walk away like some hero?" I looked at him. Finally, truly looked. The boy who never had to grow up, who never had to fight for anything, who thought being loud meant being strong. "No," I said. "I don't want to be a hero. I just want peace." For the next week, Dad doubled down. He called relatives, neighbors, even tried to contact my boss, claiming elder abuse, abandonment, whatever story he could invent. None of it stuck. The truth has a strange way of waiting. Quietly, patiently, and then suddenly loud enough to shatter walls. Friday morning approached like the edge of a cliff. Danny slept beside me on the couch, bundled in her favorite blanket. The soft dawn light traced gold across her hair. I pressed my lips to her forehead and whispered, "Today's the day." I stepped into the hallway. Dad was already pacing, eyes bloodshot, fists clenched. "You really think the cops are going to make me leave my own house?" I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. At 9 a.m. sharp, the deputy's cruiser pulled up to the curb, clipboard in hand, badge gleaming in the early morning sun. Dad was already at the door, puffed up like a balloon about to burst. Eric stood just behind him, hoodie, wrinkled hair, messy cereal bowl still in hand, like none of this was real. I stood on the porch, calm. The deputy stepped onto the path, nodded at me. "Ma'am, we're here for the formal removal. Possession of property transfers today per court approval." "You think you can do this to us?" Dad shouted before I could respond. "After everything we've done for her, she's throwing her own father into the street." His voice cracked like thunder. But the street was quiet. The neighbors had already started watching. Val peeked from her curtains. Leah stood on her porch, arms crossed, phone in hand. The deputy stayed neutral. "Mr. Monroe, this is a lawful eviction. You've had your 30 days. Eric sneered. "No one's going to believe her. Not after everything she's pulled." I held up the flash drive, the one Leah had saved. The one with the slap, the scream, the fall. They already do. I handed it to the deputy. He plugged it into his tablet, watched the first 20 seconds, then looked up and nodded slowly. That's more than enough. Dad tried to step forward. The deputy stepped in front of him. "Sir, if you escalate, you'll be detained." Dad backed down, eyes blazing. Eric muttered, "You think this is justice, this is revenge?" "No," I said quietly. "This is freedom." And for the first time in years, I meant it. Val finally stepped outside. She shook her head, arms crossed tight against her chest. You could have worked this out quietly, Jessa. Family isn't something you throw away. I met her eyes. Family doesn't slap you in front of your child while you're bleeding in a hospital bed. A silence rippled through the crowd. Someone across the street whispered, "Wait, what?" I stepped up onto the porch holding my documents title, deed, trust papers, court filing, and video summary in hand. This house was left to me by my mother. It belonged to my grandfather. My name is the only one on the deed. Dad looked around, eyes desperate, searching for sympathy, finding none. I paid for everything in this house for over a year, I continued. Utilities, groceries, my brother's bills, rent on a house I owned. I looked at Val, and I was assaulted. In a hospital bed for saying the word no. I felt Danny beside me before I saw her. She had Bunny in one arm, my hand in the other. She looked up, voice small but clear. "You hurt my mom. That's what ruined it." Dad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Eric stared at her like she was a ghost. That was it. That was the moment when they realized they had not just lost the house, but lost control. The deputy handed me a form initialed and sealed. "Ma'am, per court authority, this property is yours, uncontested." Eric dropped his duffel bag on the porch. Dad stood frozen, blinking like he'd just woken up from a long, bitter dream. They descended the steps in silence. At the bottom, Dad turned. "You'll regret this." I didn't blink. "No," I said. "I regret letting it go on this long." The door shut behind them with a sound that didn't echo. It landed. I stood in the quiet hallway, the hum of the refrigerator soft in the background. Danny looked up. "Are we safe now?" I knelt and kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, we are. We stayed for 2 more weeks, not out of fear, but to breathe, to finish what needed finishing." I cleaned every drawer, donated most of the furniture, let go of things that carried more pain than memory. Then, without fanfare, I sold the house. It was never a home, just a vessel, a battlefield, a ghost. The money went into a modest rental cottage across town, 2 bedrooms, a slanted roof, lavender bushes in the yard, the kitchen windows faced east, and every morning sunlight spilled across Danny's room like a blessing. She picked the paint, pale sky blue. We hung her drawings on the wall. We danced in the hallway. We had pancakes for dinner and didn't whisper anymore. At night she slept soundly, no midnight flinches, no whispered fears, just peace. I started therapy. Megan watched Danny during my sessions. For the first time, I said the words I had only ever whispered. He made me feel like love had to be earned, like survival meant silence, like my voice was a problem. The therapist asked what changed. I said, "My daughter asked if we were safe," and I couldn't lie anymore. Megan still came by with coffee and pie. Sometimes we sat in silence while Danny painted. Other times we laughed until we cried. "You're different," she said once, watching me across the table. "I'm lighter," I replied. Like I finally stopped carrying someone else's bricks. One Sunday, Danny and I sat on the porch. She brushed Bunny's ears with a toothbrush, totally serious. The breeze carried the smell of lavender and new beginnings. "Mommy," she asked, "do you think Bunny's proud of us?" I looked at her, at the tiny girl who had survived so much, who had stayed soft in a hard world. I think Bunny always knew we were stronger than we believed. She leaned against me, small and warm. Her hand slipped into mine, and for the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. Have you ever been told you owe us by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? If you've ever broken free from that kind of control, your story matters. Drop it in the comments below. And if this story hit home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more powerful stories of quiet strength, bold freedom, and unexpected redemption.